Welcome, dear listeners. Tonight, let your thoughts drift gently as we take you on a peaceful journey. This is a space for calm, for quiet moments, and for the kind of stories that settle your heart and slow your breath. Make yourself comfortable, close your eyes if you wish, and allow the world to soften around you. Now, let's begin with tonight's story. Today's story is titled The Infinite Path: The Chronicles of Anwyn. Chapter 1, The Invitation Beneath the Willow Sky. The air was still, warm, and soft like a silken blanket drawn over the world. Somewhere far off, a dove cooed gently as if trying not to wake the sleeping fields. A breeze, scented faintly with wildflowers and dew-warmed grass, crept through the open window and stirred the pale blue curtains with a whisper. High above, the sky stretched wide and endless, a delicate wash of pastel gold and hazy lilac, as if the heavens themselves were drifting in a dream. And in the quiet heart of that summer day, beneath the sheltering arms of an ancient willow tree, someone was waiting. Her name was Anwyn, a name nearly forgotten by most, yet whispered still by the winds that danced through the meadows. Anwyn was no ordinary soul. Some said she had been born in a house where the rain never stopped and the candles never died. Others believed she wandered in and out of dreams, leaving behind feathers and poems wherever she walked. But today, Anwyn had a very simple purpose: to welcome you into her world. She stood barefoot in the grass, a linen journal tucked beneath her arm, and a cup of jasmine tea cooling slowly in her hand. Her dark curls were pinned up loosely, and a single silver bell dangled from one ear. The bell made no sound. It never had. "You're just in time," she said softly, though no one had spoken to her. It was the beginning of a summer not quite like any other. Far beyond a hill that cradled her small cottage, the world buzzed with the noise of cities, the click of clocks, and the low hum of obligations. But here, the only rhythm was that of the earth itself. Even time, it seemed, paused to sit under the willow and listen. Anwyn set her journal on a wide stone table etched with old symbols, marks left by others who had sat beneath this tree long ago. Her fingers brushed over one of them, a swirl like a sleeping galaxy. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the past breathe through her skin. "Do you remember," she whispered to no one in particular, "what it's like to do nothing, and be okay with that?" She spoke to the wind, to the birds, perhaps to you. A dragonfly hovered near her hand and then darted away with a shimmer of light. Somewhere nearby, the grass shifted, a quiet rustle that might have been a rabbit or perhaps something else entirely. That was how the world worked here. You never quite knew what you'd find if you sat still long enough. From the willow tree hung dozens of glass bottles, each one containing a single line from a forgotten song. When the wind blew just right, they chimed not in notes, but in memory. And today, they were silent. Waiting. Anwyn walked slowly toward the path leading through the meadow, her steps deliberate, unhurried. The trail wasn't marked by signs but by small offerings, a smooth stone balanced on another, a feather standing upright in the soil, a single candle whose wax never melted. They had been left by those who'd come before, wanderers of the quiet world. The invitation wasn't written. It wasn't even spoken aloud. But if you were quiet enough, if your heart had a little space between the beats, you could feel it. Come. Come rest a while. Let the story find you. The meadow opened before her like a living painting. Tall grasses swayed in lazy choreography, golden and green, tipped with violet thistle and soft bluebells. Bees hummed with ancient purpose, their low song grounding and familiar. The sunlight spilled over everything like honey, warming the bones of the world. Anwyn paused at a curve in the path where an old swing hung from a tree with bark like ironwood. No one had sat on that swing in years, or perhaps they had, but only in dreams. She gave it a gentle push, and it creaked once, like a sigh. Beyond the swing, the land sloped downward toward a grove where the light turned softer, the air cooler. But she didn't go there yet. Not today. Instead, she knelt beside a patch of clover and pulled from her pocket a tiny envelope. Inside was a single wish, folded like origami and sealed with moon dust. She tucked it gently beneath the rock and smiled. "It's your turn now," she said, still to no one. And then, slowly, she turned and walked back toward the willow, her bare feet brushing the path, the scent of jasmine and mint trailing in her wake. You might not have noticed it at first, but the world had changed just a little. The sky seemed softer. The wind, more curious. And your shoulders. They were lighter than they had been. Anwyn reached the stone table once more and sat. The bell in her ear gave the faintest chime, even though the wind had died. "Come sit," she said quietly. "Let the rest of it fade for a while." She didn't need to speak louder. The story had already begun. Chapter 2, The Sunlit Path Beyond the Clover. The clover patch where Anwyn had placed the folded wish now shimmered gently in the late morning light. Tiny motes of golden dust rose from the grass as if the earth itself had exhaled a soft breath of magic. The breeze returned, this time carrying the scent of river stones and distant water. Anwyn stood again, brushing the dirt from her linen skirt, and turned toward a second trail that split off from the main one. It was narrower, winding, less certain of itself, but it called to her, as it always had. The way the path moved was curious, like it remembered each step ever taken along it and bent itself to memory. A sparrow flitted past her shoulder, then landed on a broken fence post ahead. It tilted its head at her expectantly, as though to say, "Are you coming or not?" She smiled and followed. This was the path that led to the River of Bells, a place few had ever found twice. The river wasn't marked on any map, not even in the old atlases that Anwyn kept on the top shelf of her bookshelf, the ones with the fading leather spines and ink that smelled like thunder. As she walked, the canopy thickened slightly, with branches of ash and elm forming archways above. The light filtered through in golden shafts, illuminating swirls of dust and floating seed fluff. Birds called in the distance, not in alarm or hunger, but in greeting. Every few steps, a new sound joined the harmony of the forest, a leaf falling, the snap of a twig, the soft trickle of water deep ahead. The air was cooler now, with a faint mist that curled along the edges of the trail, brushing against Anwyn's ankles like a curious cat. She paused at a weathered wooden sign that had no words. Only a carved crescent moon. Beneath the sign lay a flat stone with 4 polished pebbles resting atop it, tokens, left behind by other travelers. She picked up the smallest one, warm from the sun, and placed it gently in her pocket. "It's your story too now," she whispered to the stone. Further ahead, the path opened to a clearing where sunlight spilled across a rocky bed. And there it was, the river. It was not wide, nor deep, but it danced. Truly danced. The River of Bells was named not because of any sound it made, but because of the tiny silver bells that clung to the branches above it, long-forgotten ornaments from a forgotten ritual. No one knew who had placed them there, or why. Some were tangled in ivy. Others swayed freely, glinting like stars caught in daylight. The water itself was impossibly clear, and when it passed over certain stones, it shimmered in different colors: emerald, sapphire, rose gold, depending on the angle of the sun. Beneath its surface were coins worn smooth by time, small trinkets, and even a porcelain figurine of a sleeping fox. Anwyn stepped to the water's edge, letting her toes touch the river. It was cool, not cold, and sent a ripple of energy up through her bones, not jarring, but awakening. She knelt and cupped the water in her hands. Instead of splashing it onto her face, she let it trickle between her fingers, watching the droplets fall like stars. And then, from the trees behind her, came a voice. Not a human voice. Something older. "What do you bring today, little keeper?" She did not startle. She only turned her head slightly, acknowledging the presence without needing to see it. "I bring a name," Anwyn replied calmly, "one that has been waiting to be heard again." A pause. A breeze stirred the bells, and for the briefest moment, they sang. "Then speak it." Anwyn stood. She took the small stone from her pocket and held it above the river. "Inoil," she whispered. The name of the quiet watcher beneath the willow. The one who waited even when no one returned. The river stilled. Even the birds seemed to hush. And then the bells rang again, soft, joyful, like wind chimes at the start of spring. The water danced with life. Anwyn placed the stone into the river. It sank slowly, not down but outward, vanishing into the current as though the river had accepted it into another world entirely. "I never forget a promise," she said aloud, to herself, to the trees, to you. As the wind curled around her once more, Anwyn turned away from the river and made her way back toward the clearing. But not before plucking a single silver bell from the lowest branch. She held it gently, then fastened it to a red string around her wrist. Not to keep it but to remember. And the river watched her go, as it always did. Chapter 3, Whispers Beneath the Wind Trees. The forest had its own language. It did not speak in words, but in patterns, shifts in light, the curl of moss on a tree trunk, the tempo of wind through the canopy. Anwyn had long ago learned to listen, not with her ears, but with her breath. After leaving the River of Bells, she followed a narrow trail that curved like a ribbon through the woods. This path was older, and wilder. Roots jutted from the earth like sleeping snakes, and the trees leaned in close, as if trying to eavesdrop on her thoughts. The air had changed here. Cooler. Thicker. The light came in beams that wove through the leaves like golden thread. Ferns lined the trail like quiet watchers, and somewhere in the distance, a woodpecker tapped out a gentle rhythm. Anwyn slowed her steps. She could feel it now them. The wind was no longer random. It was directed, purposeful, winding between the trees and circling her ankles like a cat that had remembered your scent. It tugged at her sleeves, her hair, even the bell tied to her wrist. It whispered. Not loud. Not clear. But there was a message in it, fragmented and ancient. A rhythm like SHHHHH, come, listen, remember. She paused beneath a tall wind tree, a kind of willow that grew only in this part of the forest. Its long, ribbon-like leaves shimmered slightly in the wind, producing a sound like distant chimes or forgotten lullabies. Anwyn closed her eyes. She let her fingers graze the trunk, which pulsed faintly with warmth, almost a heartbeat. Are you here again? She asked softly. Is it time already? For a long moment, there was only the sound of the leaves and a far-off breeze threading through the woods. And then, a voice. Soft as fog, low as roots beneath the ground. She never left. Anwyn's eyes opened slowly. Standing just beyond the light was a figure. Not a person exactly, but not a shadow either. It wore the shape of a girl, but her form shifted gently like smoke caught in moonlight. Her hair was made of leaves. Her eyes, of stars. Do you know her? The figure asked. I remember all of them, Anwyn replied. But I can't always find the paths they leave behind. The figure tilted her head. She's close now. Closer than she has been in years. But she is afraid. Afraid of what? Of waking. Anwyn stepped closer, but the figure drifted back. Where is she? In the place where the wind sleeps. Anwyn nodded slowly. She understood. I will go. The figure hesitated. She doesn't remember her name, it said, a flicker of sadness in its form. Anwyn reached into her satchel and pulled out a thin ribbon of parchment. She whispered to it, then folded it once, twice, 3 times, each fold embedding a fragment of memory, and tied it to a strand of ivy growing along a nearby branch. She will, Anwyn whispered. When she's ready. The wind changed. It grew softer, slower, like an exhale. The figure bowed her head and began to dissolve, first the arms, then the shoulders, then her entire form, fading back into the forest as if she'd never been there at all. Only the leaves remembered. Anwyn stood for a moment longer, watching the trail ahead. It would grow harder now. The forest would test her, show her not only where others had been lost, but where she, too, might lose herself. She tucked the rest of the ribbons carefully back into her bag. Each one was a name, a memory, a thread in the tapestry of this hidden world. And as she walked on, the trees whispered behind her, not in warning, but in song. A song older than stories, older than language. And somewhere, not far ahead, something began to stir. Not in fear, but in longing. Chapter 4, Meeting the Silent Ones at the Edge of the Stream. The trail deepened. Each step Anwyn took seemed to pull her further, not just into the forest, but into the memory of it. The trees grew older here, gnarled and bowed as if bearing the weight of forgotten centuries. Moss blanketed the trunks like velvet, and the roots rose in wide, winding arcs high enough that a fox or child could slip beneath them unseen. But today, there were no children in this forest. Only her. And something waiting. The air shifted once more, losing the warmth of mid-morning. In its place came a strange stillness, not empty, not foreboding, but watchful. As if the world had tilted ever so slightly, and something beneath the surface had opened an eye. Anwyn's bell gave a single, tremulous chime. She adjusted her satchel across her shoulder and pressed onward, letting the silence guide her. She had learned long ago that silence didn't mean absence. In the right places, it meant presence deep and abiding. The path led to a clearing shaped like a crescent moon. Along one edge ran a shallow stream, its waters clear but unnaturally still, as if it had forgotten how to flow. Trees lined the far bank, their trunks close together, bark pale and smooth like bone. The leaves above them did not stir. And there, seated beside the water, were the silent ones. Anwyn had only seen them once before, years ago, during the last full turning of the forest's memory. They were not ghosts, nor spirits in the way most imagined. They were remnants. Echoes of travelers who had chosen to stay behind when the rest of the world moved on. Not dead. Not alive. Simply, here. There were 4 of them today. The first sat cross-legged beside a fallen log, their head bowed, fingers tracing symbols in the dirt that vanished as soon as they were formed. The second leaned against a tree with eyes closed, unmoving save for a slow, rhythmic breath. The third stood knee-deep in the water, staring into it as if searching for something they had once lost. The fourth sat in a wooden chair that had no earthly reason to exist in the forest, watching Anwyn approach with eyes like deep green glass. None of them spoke. They never did. But they saw her. She stepped quietly into the clearing, bowed her head in greeting, and waited. A leaf fell from one of the trees. The one in the chair raised their hand, long, delicate fingers, transparent at the edges, and caught it before it touched the ground. Then, slowly, they pointed to the stream. Anwyn followed the motion and stepped closer to the water's edge. Beneath the surface, something shimmered. Not gold. Not silver. But memory. Images flickered, half-formed moments, echoing thoughts. A girl reading in a treehouse. A boy crying beside a broken kite. A candle burning in an empty room. And then, her. Anwyn saw herself years younger, sitting on the banks of this very stream, knees hugged to her chest, tears leaving silent trails down her face. She had forgotten this moment. Forgotten why she'd wept. The memory rose from the water and hovered before her. A voice not spoken aloud, but pressed directly into her mind said, "Will you take it back?" Anwyn trembled. "I don't know what it was," she whispered. "It was yours." She reached forward, but the memory pulled away, settling gently back into the stream. "Not yet." The one at the tree stirred and pointed toward the opposite bank. There, half hidden beneath a blanket of ivy, stood a structure. A small archway. It was made of stone, worn by time and covered in faint etchings that looked like both letters and roots. Anwyn had never seen it before. Or perhaps she had, but chosen to forget. She crossed the stream. The water parted around her ankles, rippling with warmth. As she reached the archway, the fourth silent one rose from the chair and followed, hovering silently behind. There were 6 runes carved into the arch. Each pulsed faintly when she looked at them. The first, a spiral. The second, a teardrop. The third, a flame. The fourth, a feather. The fifth, a key. The sixth, blank. The silent one placed their hand on the final space and turned to her. The voice came again, not from the air, but from within. "You must bring what is missing. Only then will the gate open." Anwyn touched the blank rune space. It was cool. Empty. But not lonely. "I understand," she said. "It will take time." The silent one nodded slowly. Then, with a motion like mist drawn by wind, they returned to the stream. The others did not move. Anwyn stood before the arch for a long time, heart full of thoughts she could not yet name. Then she turned and walked slowly back across the clearing. She knelt at the water's edge and pulled a small, empty vial from her satchel. With great care, she filled it with a few drops from the stream. As she rose to leave, she bowed once more to the silent ones. "Thank you for keeping what I could not." The one in the water blinked, and the ripple they caused echoed all the way down the stream, where the memory had returned to sleep. Anwyn left the crescent clearing. Behind her, the stream remained still, the trees unmoved. But something had changed. The forest had accepted her question. Now, it would wait for the answer. Chapter 5, The Swing Beneath the Forgetting Tree. Anwyn walked without looking down at her feet, as though her body already knew the way and her thoughts were drifting somewhere just above the treetops. The vial of stream water clinked softly in her satchel, warm against her side. She didn't need to peer inside to know that the memory within it had begun to glow. A soft breeze returned to the forest, this time playful, tugging lightly at her sleeves as if to nudge her in a new direction. She followed. The trees began to thin. Not in age, for these were older than the others' colossal trunks with bark like wrinkled stone, but in presence. It was as if they were choosing to step aside, making space. And soon, there it was. The forgetting tree. It stood in the center of a circular glade, bathed in light that didn't quite feel like sunlight, though it was warm and dappled and golden. The tree's trunk was wide enough to hold a house, and its branches spread far beyond the clearing, reaching into the canopy like fingers dipped in stardust. From one of those ancient limbs hung a swing. It was simple, just a wooden seat, suspended by two lengths of rope that had never frayed, never aged. They glowed faintly in the light, not with magic, but with remembrance. And yet, this was not a place for remembering. It was for letting go. Anwyn approached slowly. Her breath caught for a moment, not from fear, but something more delicate, like the feeling before a tear falls. The swing drifted gently in the breeze. "I didn't expect you to still be here," she whispered. She stepped closer and placed one hand on the rope. It was warm, pulsing faintly, as if it recognized her. The air was quiet. Too quiet. Then, a voice, her own, spoke from the base of the tree. Not aloud. From within. "This is where you left her." Anwyn froze. She remembered now. A shadow, dim and small, once curled at the foot of this tree, shivering and forgotten. A child? No, her. A younger version of herself, left behind in a moment of grief so deep she'd buried the memory in the roots of the forest. "I didn't mean to," she murmured. "I thought she would be safer without me." The swing creaked gently, then stilled. A presence stirred at the edge of the glade. A figure no older than 9 or 10 stepped from behind the tree. Her hair was tangled. Her eyes wide. And her arms clutched a toy rabbit whose stitching had long since come undone. The girl looked up at Anwyn. "You left," she said. "I know. You said you'd come back." "I didn't forget," Anwyn said, sinking to her knees. I didn't know how to carry you." The girl tilted her head. "Do you want to swing with me?" Tears welled in Anwyn's eyes. She nodded. The two sat together on the swing. As it moved back and forth, the glade began to hum soft, musical, like lullabies wrapped in wind. And with each arc of the swing, pieces of memory fell back into place. The broken kite. The bedtime stories cut short. The rain that wouldn't stop. The silence that followed, all of it drifted up from the earth, wound itself around the swing, and melted into the golden light above. Anwyn leaned her head on the child's shoulder. "I'm sorry I left you." The girl didn't reply. She didn't have to. Because forgiveness, like remembering, doesn't always need words. After some time, minutes, hours, or days, for time folds differently here, Anwyn stood. The child remained on the swing, her features now softening, glowing faintly as if being rewritten. "I won't leave again," Anwyn said. "You don't have to stay," the girl replied, smiling faintly. "I just needed to know you still remembered me." The swing slowed. The child faded, not vanishing, but folding back into the tree. And in her place, the toy rabbit remained freshly stitched, newly whole. Anwyn picked it up, held it close to her chest, and turned away from the swing. The forgetting tree stood tall and silent. But in its roots, a new promise had been planted. As she left the glade, the forest around her seemed lighter. The shadows thinner. The path ahead clearer. And behind her, in the heart of the clearing, the swing moved once more, empty, yet full of memory. Chapter 6, The Gathering Place of the Story Keepers. The trail curved westward, where the light mellowed into a golden hush. Anwyn walked quietly now, her hands gently cradling the stuffed rabbit against her chest. It had grown heavier, not in weight but in memory, as if the threads that now held it together carried every word, every laugh, and every tear she had left behind. Ahead, the trees widened again. There was no wind. No birdsong. No rustling in the underbrush. Only a stillness. A reverence. Anwyn stepped beyond the last ring of trees and found herself in a wide clearing, covered in short, wild grass and dotted with crooked stone markers. They jutted out at odd angles, half swallowed by moss and thyme, inscribed with symbols that changed shape when you blinked. At the center of the glade was a low stone circle. It wasn't built, it had grown there. As if the earth itself had formed it in the shape of a fire pit that had never known flame. She had reached the gathering place of the story keepers. No one knew how old it was. No one could say who the first keeper had been, or how many had come before. But they all knew what it was for. This was where stories came to rest. And sometimes, to awaken. Anwyn stepped toward the circle. As she crossed the edge of the moss-covered stones, the air shimmered. One by one, they began to appear. The story keepers. Not people, not entirely. Shapes cloaked in long coats woven from bark and starlight, with faces that flickered between past and future. Their eyes held no color, only reflection. They did not move with steps, but with memory, sliding across the space as if drifting through pages. There were 7 of them today. The first wore a crown made of candle smoke. The second carried a quill with no ink. The third had a clock face where a heart should be. The fourth whispered always, though no one heard the words. The fifth bore no mouth, yet hummed lullabies that could make the trees sigh. The sixth walked backward through time, never facing you, but always watching. And the seventh, the one who stepped forward, held an empty map. The map was made of silk and silence. It flapped once, though there was no wind. Anwyn bowed her head. "I've returned," she said. "With what was lost." The seventh tilted their head. They made no sound, but a warm vibration traveled through the clearing, a question not spoken aloud. "Do you remember who you were?" Anwyn reached into her satchel and pulled out the vial of stream water, now softly glowing. She placed it on the center stone. "I remember her," she replied. "Not perfectly. But I'm learning." The first stepped forward. Their fingers, wrapped in tendrils of candlelight, brushed over the vial. A shimmer rose from it, spiraling upward into the sky. The memory within it unfolded like a paper flower, blooming in the air, visible, weightless, true. The child on the swing. The bells in the river. The moment beneath the willow tree. The keepers watched, unblinking. When it was done, the memory dissolved like dew at dawn. The second keeper offered Anwyn the quill with no ink. She took it, understanding what to do without needing to ask. She knelt before the empty map and wrote. But no words appeared. Because this map was not for places. It was for moments. Each stroke of the quill added texture, emotion, choices, threads in a tapestry that only the heart could read. When she finished, the map rippled once, then vanished. The keepers remained silent. Then the seventh extended a hand. Within it, a key. It was small, unassuming, made of woven wood and light. But Anwyn knew it could open something far more valuable than a door. A memory. She asked. The keeper's eyes flickered. No, she answered herself. A future. She took the key. The keepers began to fade. One by one. First the sixth, stepping backward into the veil of trees. Then the fifth, humming themselves out of existence. The fourth vanished mid-whisper. The third ticked once and was gone. The second dipped their quill into the wind and disappeared. The first became a candle whose flame was never lit. And the seventh. They watched her with those mirrored eyes a moment longer, then folded like a closing book and were gone. The glade was empty once more. Except for Anwyn. And the silence. But it was a peaceful silence. She sat in the center of the stone ring and pulled the rabbit into her lap. The key shimmered faintly between her fingers. Somewhere in the far distance, a bell rang once soft, singular. It was time to move again. She didn't know what door the key would open. Not yet. but the path ahead had shifted. And for the first time in many seasons, she wasn't afraid of what she might find. Chapter 7, Where the Wind Carries Names. The key had not weighed heavily in her hand, but it had shifted something inside her like a forgotten dream stirring just beneath the surface of waking. Anwyn walked, though she didn't know where. The forest around her no longer felt like a place of refuge. It felt like a riddle. The trees whispered, their voices curling in the air like smoke. The earth beneath her feet was both solid and slippery, as if it, too, was searching for something it had lost. The path wound deeper into the woods, and the light grew dimmer, as though the sun itself had pulled its rays into the far reaches of the sky. The air was cooler, and the scent of damp earth mingled with something else, something older. The wind began to carry a new sound, faint at first, like a hum under the soft rustle of leaves. Anwyn felt it before she heard it. A low murmur, like voices, swirling around her. They weren't human voices. They weren't even animal calls. They were the voices of things that had lived before, of thoughts lost to time, carried on the breath of the world. She followed the sound. It wasn't long before she came to a clearing unlike any other she had seen. The trees here were not tall, but stunted, their trunks gnarled and twisted. The ground was covered in low grass, but at its center, something extraordinary stood, a windmill. It was unlike any she had ever seen, made not of wood and stone, but of delicate, swirling feathers and shimmering strands of light. The blades of the windmill spun slowly in the air, though no breeze touched them. They moved as though they were stirred by some unseen force, a presence that reached beyond the physical world. Anwyn stood at the edge of the clearing, watching the windmill turn in a slow, eternal dance. The wind was stronger now, its hum rising in pitch, as though it carried a secret. "Come closer," a voice whispered, though it was not spoken. It wrapped around her like the wind itself. She stepped forward. As she approached the windmill, she noticed something strange. The blades of the windmill were not just moving, they were catching something. Tiny, glowing fragments of light that swirled around them, vanishing into the depths of the spinning blades. Names. Anwyn's breath caught. The names drifted from the windmill's blades, glowing faintly like stars, each one caught in the eternal spin of the wind. As the blades turned, they carved a path through the air, each gust of wind adding to the collection of lost identities that fluttered, weightless, through the space between here and there. Names of those who had wandered and never returned. Names of those who had forgotten themselves. And then her name. It caught in the current of the wind, suspended for a moment between two blades, glowing softly in the twilight. Anwyn stood frozen, watching as her name was caught in the blades. It shimmered, hung there for a moment, and then flicked away. A part of her had been caught in that wind, and the breeze took it, as if the windmill had pulled it from her very heart. She looked around, seeking the source of the voice, and in that moment, she noticed a figure standing in the shadows beneath one of the stunted trees. A figure cloaked in wind and shadow, with the faintest glimmer of light around them. The figure stepped forward, their face hidden beneath a hood. "You've come for it, haven't you?" Anwyn swallowed, her heart pounding in her chest. "I don't know," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't know it was even missing." The figure nodded slowly. "The wind carries names, and sometimes, it carries ours. But to take it back," they paused, turning their head toward the windmill. "To take it back, you must give something up." Anwyn's fingers tightened around a key in her pocket. "Something of mine?" she asked. The figure shook their head. "Not something of yours. Something of the world's." The windmill slowed, the blades pausing mid-spin, as though waiting for her response. Anwyn glanced back at the path she had walked to get here. She thought of the moments she had left behind, the memories she had forgotten, the pieces of herself she had buried in the soil of the forest. There were so many things she had been running from, trying to avoid. So many parts of herself that had splintered and scattered with the wind. But now, there was a choice. She could take her name back. But only at a cost. She stood silently for a long time, her gaze fixed on the windmill. The names it carried were not just hers, they were everyone's. Every person who had ever lost themselves, every soul who had wandered too far, forgotten who they were, and become nothing but a whisper in the wind. Finally, she spoke. "I will give it," she said softly, her voice steady. "But I won't take it back." The figure's eyes glinted, a flicker of approval passing through the shadow. "Then you will have what you came for." Anwyn stepped forward. The windmill hummed again, a low, vibrating note that filled the space between her and the figure. The names began to flicker and fade, swallowed into the wind. And then, Anwyn felt it. The wind, warm and heavy, pressed against her skin like an embrace. The weight of it was unfamiliar, and yet, it felt right. For the first time, she could hear her name. Not in the air, not in the wind, but in the earth. And she could feel it in her bones. Her name was not the only thing that was coming back. Her place. Her purpose. Her story. She was not a lost traveler anymore. She was part of the world again. The figure watched her, their form becoming less substantial, fading as the wind took them. "And so, you remember?" Anwyn nodded, a gentle smile curving her lips. She didn't need to speak. The wind had already answered for her. Chapter 8, The Reaching Sky. Anwyn had no idea how long she stood beneath the windmill, her name spinning around her in the quiet of the twilight. Time had become a delicate thing, fragile as gossamer. It fluttered with the wind, pausing only when she let herself breathe deeply. She could feel the weight of it, the weight of remembering. But the wind had given her what she needed. Her place. Her purpose. Her story was returning, thread by thread, like a tapestry being rewoven with the gentlest of hands. Yet still, the world awaited. The sky above her was growing darker, the stars beginning to take form, blinking in the vast expanse. The air around her hummed with anticipation. Something was shifting again. The wind wasn't just guiding her now. It was leading her. The path that had once been winding and uncertain was now laid out before her, clear and true, as if the forest itself had made way for her. She stepped forward, the feeling of belonging in her bones still fresh, and the world seemed to hold its breath with her. The trees parted to reveal a great archway made of ancient stone. The stone was weathered, cracked in places, yet still stood tall, rising far above her head. A stone arch with no obvious doors, no visible entrance. Just an opening, framed by ivy and glowing with the light of the stars above. The wind whipped through the archway, pulling the trees in a soft dance, as though beckoning her to cross. The air around it felt thick with something she couldn't quite explain. A calling, perhaps. The arch was not a physical barrier. It was a threshold. Anwyn stood at the edge, her heart racing. She had crossed so many thresholds already, leaving behind pieces of herself, letting go of things she had once held close. She had faced the wind, had embraced the loss of her name, had given up the memories she thought defined her. But this was different. This wasn't about leaving something behind. This was about becoming. The wind grew stronger, tugging gently at her hair, urging her forward. The night was full of silent promises, like the stars themselves were waiting on the other side of the arch, ready to shine just a little brighter. A voice low, familiar whispered through the space between the stones. The sky is not a place to look at. It is a place to reach. The words sent a shiver down her spine. She knew what they meant. The archway was not just a passage through space, it was a passage through time. A bridge between the moment she had been and the person she was becoming. It was a gateway to the unknown, to everything that lay just beyond the horizon of her understanding. The key she had carried with her from the forgotten tree felt warm in her pocket now. Its shape, so simple yet full of power, had always been a promise. A promise that she had the power to choose, to unlock what had been hidden. But did she dare? The night held its breath as Anwyn stepped forward. The grass beneath her feet whispered, urging her onward. She reached the archway's threshold and stood there for a moment, the cool air pressing against her skin. Without another thought, she crossed. And immediately, the world shifted. It was as if she had stepped into a new plane. The air became lighter, filled with the scent of something unfamiliar, something ancient and wild. The stars above her were clearer now, closer within reach. A stretch of light like a river wound through the sky, and the ground beneath her feet was soft, almost springy, like stepping on clouds. She was standing on a great plain, one that stretched far into the distance, where the horizon met the sky in a curve of light. There were no trees here, no stones, only the vastness of the world, open and infinite. Anwyn felt the weight of everything in this place, her past, her choices, the memories she had allowed to be carried away by the wind. But they weren't gone. They had simply become part of the sky. And she was now a part of it. Ahead of her stood another figure, their back turned toward her. The figure was draped in robes that shimmered like the night sky, and their hair, long and silver, flowed like a river of stars. They turned slowly, and Anwyn felt her breath catch. It was her. The version of herself she had left behind. The version who had forgotten. The version who had once believed she wasn't enough. Anwyn stepped closer, her heart pounding. The other Anwyn smiled softly, as though understanding exactly what was happening. "You've come," she said, her voice a gentle echo in the vast expanse of this place. Anwyn nodded. "I was afraid," she said softly, "that I would never find you." The other Anwyn shook her head. "You didn't need to find me. I was always here." She held out her hand. "We were always here, together." Anwyn took the outstretched hand. As their fingers met, the sky around them began to shift, swirling in colors beyond comprehension: deep blues, vivid purples, radiant golds. The stars above danced, weaving patterns, and the ground beneath their feet seemed to pulse with life. And then, the world began to melt into something else. Not a place, but a feeling. Anwyn had crossed the threshold into herself, into everything she was meant to be. She felt the wind stir again, but this time it was not a calling. It was an affirmation. The sky had reached her. And now, she was a part of it. Chapter 9, The Song of Stars and Silence. Anwyn stood at the center of the endless plain, her heart thrumming with the rhythm of the universe. The ground beneath her feet pulsed with life, resonating with the same deep hum she felt in her bones. The stars above were not distant or unreachable anymore. They were within her reach, each one a note in a cosmic melody, each one calling her by a name she could finally understand. For the first time in what felt like ages, the sky above was not a vast emptiness. It was a song, and she was its echo. The other Anwyn, the one who had always been there, hiding in the corners of her mind, watched her with a knowing smile. Her presence was not one of separation, but of wholeness, as though every version of herself had converged into this one moment. "You've come home," the other Anwyn said, her voice soft but resonant, like the quiet hum of a string-pulled taut. "I didn't know where home was," Anwyn replied, her voice trembling, filled with wonder. "I thought it was something I had to search for. But now," she glanced around, at the infinite stretch of sky, the stars twinkling like forgotten dreams. "I realize it's been here all along." The other Anwyn nodded, her face full of understanding. "Home is not a place. It's the truth that threads through everything. It's the song beneath the silence." Anwyn felt the wind stir once more, but this time it wasn't the gentle tug of the unknown. This was a deeper pull, a call to the stars themselves. She closed her eyes, letting the song of the universe fill her, letting the hum of the earth beneath her feet intertwine with the whispers of the wind. She felt the names, the lost fragments, the stories carried by the stars. They were all woven together, each story, each soul, a vital part of something larger. And within that vastness, she was not small. She was an integral note in the song that had always played. But there was more. The sky began to change. The stars shifted, forming a pattern she could almost recognize. It was as though the sky itself was unfolding a story one she had forgotten, but that she was now ready to understand. You have a choice, the other Anwyn's voice echoed softly, the words drifting through the air like a lullaby. You can stay here, in the song of the stars. Or you can return, and bring this melody with you. Anwyn's heart fluttered. The choice hung before her like a distant star, warm and inviting, but unreachable in a way she didn't quite understand. She could stay in this place of absolute connection, where she was one with the universe, never to feel lost again. Or she could return to the world she had left behind, carrying this newfound knowledge, this song, with her, to remind others of what they had forgotten. The wind stirred again, softer this time, urging her to listen. Do you hear it? The other Anwyn asked. The song that's been missing from your heart. It's always been there. You just needed to remember the words. Anwyn closed her eyes once more, letting the song wash over her, listening to the voices of the stars, the winds, the earth. She felt herself merge with the sky, her own song blending with the melody that filled the air. But as she opened her eyes again, she saw the path ahead. It was not the same as the one she had walked before. It was clearer, illuminated by the light of understanding. The world beyond the stars called to her, but this time, it was not the world of forgetting. It was the world of becoming. She took a deep breath, holding the song of the stars within her, and stepped forward. I will return, she said, her voice strong now, no longer trembling with uncertainty. Not to find myself, but to help others remember their own song. To remind them that they, too, are part of something much larger. That they are not lost. That they are not alone. The other Anwyn smiled, her eyes glowing with pride. You will carry the song with you, she said softly. And in the silence, you will find the stars again. The ground beneath Anwyn's feet began to shimmer, and the sky began to fold back, like a dream slipping into the shadows of memory. But the song remained, woven into her very being, carrying her forward. As she stepped into the unknown, she knew one thing with absolute certainty: she was not walking alone. The stars, the wind, the earth, they would always be with her. And the song would never fade. Chapter 10, The Return to the Earth's Embrace. The sky had shifted again. The stars had dimmed and the melody of the universe softened into a gentle hum, like the fading notes of a lullaby. Anwyn stood at the threshold of the vast, eternal sky, her heart echoing with the song she carried within her, the song of the stars, the song of remembrance, and the song of return. It was time. Time to return to the world she had once known. The world she had once left behind. The wind, ever gentle, whispered its encouragement as it swirled around her, urging her to take the next step. The earth below her feet, solid and familiar, seemed to welcome her back as if it, too, had waited for this moment. Anwyn's fingers clenched around a key in her pocket, warm, not heavy, but full of purpose. This key was not for a door. It was for a passage, a gateway back to the life she had walked away from in search of herself. She turned her back to the sky, to the endless horizon of stars, and faced the earth again. The journey had brought her to this moment of clarity, this understanding of the world and her place within it. And now, she had a decision to make. The path before her was not one of shadows or uncertainty. It was lit by the soft glow of a dawn that seemed to rise from within her. The world beyond the horizon was calling her, not with its old questions, but with new possibilities. Anwyn took a step. The ground shifted beneath her, a soft pull of the earth beneath her feet that brought her back. Slowly, gently, the world around her changed. The stars faded, and the sky turned a deeper blue, giving way to a quiet light that broke through the trees, shining down on the forest below. The air was familiar, crisp and cool, but filled with the promise. The wind carried the scent of earth, of growing things, of rain, and fresh beginnings. As her feet touched the familiar soil once more, Anwyn felt the song within her vibrate through the earth itself. She was no longer separate from the world. She was part of it, woven into the fabric of time, the threads of memory and possibility now intertwined in ways she could not yet understand. And she knew that the journey she had taken, this long and winding path through the forest of forgotten names, through the river of memories, and beneath the stars, had not been about finding a destination. It had been about remembering herself. The trees around her seemed to welcome her return, their branches stretching wide, their leaves rustling like whispers in the wind. The world had not changed, but she had. She looked around. The familiar path from before, the one she had walked alone, was now filled with possibility. She could see it with new eyes now, eyes that knew the value of silence, the power of remembering, and the strength of moving forward. The earth beneath her feet hummed with energy, alive and vibrating with the pulse of a world that was always waiting for her to come back to it. And then, she heard it. A voice, faint at first, then growing louder, warmer. "Welcome home." Anwyn turned toward the voice and saw, standing at the edge of the clearing, a figure. Their face was familiar, yet different, older, wiser, but with the same spark of life she had carried within her heart all along. It was her past self. The version of Anwyn who had never left, who had stayed behind while she wandered through the stars. The version of herself that had never stopped loving the world, even when she had forgotten it. The two of them stood there for a long moment, gazing at one another. The past and the present. The lost and the found. "You've come back," the past Anwyn said softly, her voice filled with an understanding only time could offer. "But you're not the same." "No," Anwyn replied, a gentle smile tugging at her lips. "I'm not." But I've finally come to understand that I never needed to be anything different. I just needed to remember. Her past self smiled, nodding. It's all here, waiting for you. You don't have to search anymore. Anwyn took a step forward, her heart light, her spirit full of the song of the stars, now anchored in the earth. She felt a deep connection to everything around her, the trees, the wind, the soil beneath her feet. The world was no longer a place she had to run from. It was the place she had always belonged. She reached out, her fingers brushing the surface of the earth, and felt the hum of life beneath her fingertips. The roots of the trees, the heartbeat of the forest, the pulse of the earth, it was all here, in the silence, in the song. And for the first time in so long, she didn't feel alone. The world had always been waiting for her. She just had to remember her place within it. The key in her pocket began to glow faintly, its warmth spreading through her body. The journey had brought her to this moment, and now, it was time to unlock the next chapter. With a deep breath, Anwyn stepped forward, her heart open, ready to embrace the next step. The world was waiting for her, and she was ready to give it her song. Epilogue, the song continues. In the days that followed, Anwyn walked through the world with new eyes. She spoke to the trees, listened to the wind, and allowed herself to be a part of the great, eternal dance of life. She carried the song of the stars within her, but she no longer needed to search for meaning. The meaning had always been there, waiting to be discovered in the quiet moments. And as she walked, she found that the world, too, had been waiting. The people she met, the places she visited, they all seemed to recognize something in her, a familiar melody, a shared memory. Anwyn didn't have to go far to find her purpose. She carried it with her, in every step, in every breath. And the song of the stars, the song of the earth, would always be with her. Because she had finally remembered. Chapter 11, The Winds of Rebirth. Anwyn stood at the edge of the village, her fingers still warm from the journey, still feeling the echo of the stars that had once guided her. The song she carried was no longer just hers, it was woven into the fabric of the world, a soft hum that resonated through every tree, every stone, every whisper of the wind. The village was small but full of life. Homes made of wood and stone lined the narrow paths, their thatched roofs glowing golden in the light of the setting sun. The sounds of children playing, the rustle of leaves, the soft murmur of voices carried on the breeze. It was a place she had once known, but it felt different now. It felt more real, more connected. She could hear the faint whisper of the song within the air, carried by the wind, the same melody that had once felt so distant, now closer than ever. It was no longer just a memory of the stars. It was here, in the very breath of the world. As she walked into the village, the people paused. They looked at her as though they recognized something familiar, something they had long forgotten. Anwyn smiled softly, knowing they could feel the change, even if they didn't understand it. It wasn't just her that had changed. The world itself had begun to shift, to hum with a new, quieter rhythm. She walked past the homes, her eyes catching glimpses of the lives that pulsed inside each one. A mother rocking a child to sleep. A man tending to a small fire. The quiet, everyday moments that were both ordinary and sacred. She walked deeper into the village until she reached the heart of it, the village square. There, a tall oak tree stood, its gnarled branches reaching high into the sky. Beneath it was a large stone, weathered by time but still strong. People often gathered here to share stories, to listen to the elders, to mark the passage of seasons. Anwyn stopped before the stone, feeling the weight of it, the memory of it. This stone had witnessed so many lives, so many stories, and yet it had always remained silent. It had never carried a song. But today, the stone hummed. She reached out, her fingers brushing against its surface. The hum deepened, vibrating through her skin. She closed her eyes and let it wash over her. The stone was remembering, too. From deep within the earth, a voice began to rise. It was not spoken aloud, but felt through the ground beneath her feet, through the air, through her heart. Welcome home, Anwyn. Her eyes fluttered open, and she smiled softly. She knew this voice. It was the same one she had heard when she first stepped into the forest, the same one that had guided her through the stars. But now, it was different. It wasn't distant. It was here, in the very pulse of the world. The people of the village began to gather around her, drawn to the sound, to the feeling of something awakening. They stood quietly, waiting, as if sensing that something profound was about to happen. And then, the song began. It was soft at first, just a whisper in the wind, a rustle in the leaves. But it grew, slowly, until it filled the air around them. The sound of stars, of earth, of time itself, woven together in a melody that carried the weight of 1,000 stories, 1,000 lives, 1,000 memories. Anwyn's heart beat in time with the song. She could feel it deep within her chest, pulsing with the rhythm of the earth, with the rhythm of the people around her. It wasn't just a melody. It was life itself. And as the song swirled through the village, through the trees, and into the very ground beneath her feet, the people began to move. Their faces softened, their eyes widened, and they began to speak slowly at first, and then more urgently, more eagerly, as if a long-forgotten memory was flooding back to them. I remember, one woman whispered. I remember the way the wind felt in my hair, when I was a child. I remember the sound of my grandmother's voice, another man said, his voice trembling. The stories she used to tell me. And one by one, the people of the village began to remember. The stories that had been lost, the memories that had been buried, all began to rise to the surface, like forgotten stars coming back into the sky. Anwyn stepped back, watching the transformation unfold before her. She had brought them the song, the reminder that they were not lost. They were part of something much larger, something that stretched through time, through memory, through every breath of the earth. And as the song filled the village, the wind began to shift. It swirled around her, lifting the edges of her hair, the fabric of her dress. It was as if the world itself was awakening, as if the earth was stretching its limbs after a long sleep. The sky above, once dim and distant, began to brighten. The stars twinkled again, but now they were closer, more familiar. They were not separate from the world, they were part of it, just as she was. Just as the people of the village were. Anwyn felt the song rise within her once more. But this time, it was not just her song. It was theirs. She turned toward the stone and placed her hand on its surface. The hum deepened, and she smiled, knowing that it was no longer just a place of memory. It was a place of rebirth. "Welcome home," the earth whispered again. And Anwyn, at the center of it all, felt herself not as a wanderer, but as part of the great, eternal song of the world. Epilogue: the song never ends. In the days that followed, the village flourished. It was as if the land itself had come alive with the memories that had been forgotten for so long. The people spoke to the trees, to the winds, to the earth beneath their feet. They shared stories of their ancestors, of the dreams they had once abandoned, and of the songs they had once lost. And Anwyn, now fully herself, continued to walk among them. Her footsteps were light, her heart full. The song that had once been distant, once been unknown, was now hers to carry. And she carried it with joy. Because she knew now that the song would never fade. It would always be here, in the earth, in the wind, in the stars. It would always be a part of the world, a part of them. And the story? The story was never truly finished. It would continue, as all stories do, carried on the wind, woven into the fabric of time. Because in the end, every story is a song. And every song, no matter how soft or how loud, is meant to be heard. Chapter 12, The Echoes of Forgotten Paths. Anwyn had returned to the heart of the village, where the song she carried had awakened the earth and its people. She had brought with her not just the melody of stars and the wind, but something deeper, something that belonged to the earth, to time, to the memory of all things lost. And yet, despite all that had been rediscovered, there was still an unanswered question. It echoed in the stillness of her heart, a whisper she could not quite shake. What now? The wind had whispered its answer. The stars had shared their song. The village had awakened. But the path ahead remained shrouded in uncertainty. There were still pieces of the puzzle, paths that lay hidden in the corners of her mind. She walked through the village, her steps soft on the earth. The people she passed greeted her with warmth, their faces open, their hearts lighter. They had remembered their stories, their histories, their songs. But Anwyn had not yet found her own. She could feel it in the air, like a door just slightly ajar, a path not yet taken. Something still lingered in the silence, a space between what was known and what remained. She walked to the edge of the village, where the forest began again, its trees standing tall and silent, their shadows stretching long in the late afternoon light. The air was cooler here, the wind sharper. It felt as though the forest itself was waiting. It was here that Anwyn had first entered the forest, the place where she had wandered, lost, and searching for something she had not yet understood. The place where she had left behind so many parts of herself. And now, it was here that she would find what was missing. Her feet carried her toward the familiar path that wound deeper into the woods, the one she had followed countless times, and yet, today, it felt different. Today, it called to her, not with questions, but with answers. Answers she had not yet asked. As she walked deeper into the forest, she noticed something strange. The trees were different here. The bark was smoother, the branches more delicate, as if the forest itself had grown more aware of her presence. The wind no longer whispered. It sang, filling the air with a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through the ground beneath her feet. And then, she saw it. A clearing. But this was not the same clearing she had known. This one was different, filled with an ethereal glow that seemed to come from the very earth itself. The grass was covered in a soft, silver light, and in the center of the clearing stood a stone circle just like the one she had seen long ago in her dreams. This was the place where it had all begun. Anwyn stepped into the circle, her breath catching in her throat. The stones were covered in moss, their surfaces smooth and worn by time. Each stone had a different symbol etched into it, a language she did not understand, but felt deep within her. As she walked closer, the symbols began to glow, faintly at first, then brighter with each step. The wind shifted around her, no longer a whisper, but a voice low and ancient, like the breath of the earth itself. "This is where the journey ends," the voice said. "And begins again." Anwyn stood in the center of the circle, her heart racing. She had reached the end of her journey, but it did not feel like an end at all. It felt like a beginning, a new chapter waiting to be written. The stone beneath her feet hummed, vibrating with energy. The symbols on the stones around her began to shift, moving in patterns she could almost understand. They were not just markings. They were memories of those who had come before, of paths long forgotten, of choices made and unmade. And then, she saw it. A path. Not a visible one, not a physical path that could be walked, but a mental one. A path woven between the stones, through the very air she breathed. A path that connected all the stories, her story, the village's story, the world's story. This was the path she had been searching for. Not in the world around her, but within herself. Anwyn closed her eyes and let the song of the earth fill her once more. The wind wrapped around her, the stars above hummed, and the earth beneath her feet vibrated with life. She could feel the path now inside her, through her. It was not something she had to find. It had always been with her. "The path is within you," the voice whispered again, softer now, almost a lullaby. Anwyn opened her eyes. The path had always been there, waiting for her to remember. She stepped forward, and the stone circle shifted. The earth beneath her feet trembled, and the world around her began to bend, not in time, not in space, but in understanding. The stones glowed brighter, the wind sang louder, and the world seemed to pause, as if holding its breath. And then, she stepped off the stone circle, back into the world. The wind stopped singing, but the hum of life around her remained strong, steady, eternal. Anwyn was no longer a wanderer. She was a keeper. The forest was no longer just a place she had passed through. It was part of her, as she was part of it. The earth, the stars, the wind, they were her song. And now, she was ready to carry it into the world. She turned back toward the village, her heart full. The song of the earth had not only awakened her, it had awakened the world. The path ahead was no longer uncertain. It was clear, not because the road was paved, but because she had finally found her place on it. And with that, Anwyn smiled, knowing that the song would never fade. It would carry her forward, always. Epilogue, The Keeper's Song. In the years that followed, Anwyn became known as the Keeper of the Song. Not because she had the power to control it, but because she had learned to listen to it, to the whispers of the earth, the hum of the wind, and the voices of the stars. She traveled far and wide, sharing the song with those who had forgotten it, reminding them of the world they were part of. She taught them that the world was not a place to conquer, but a place to remember. And as she journeyed, she carried the song with her, knowing that, in the end, the song was the only thing that mattered. Chapter 13, The Dawn of New Stories. Anwyn had walked many paths, some known and others forged in the silence of discovery. But as the keeper of the song, she realized that her journey was far from over. The world she had returned to, the world she had once left behind, was not the final destination, it was simply the beginning of a new story. The stories of the people she had touched, the stories of the lands she had crossed, and the stories that still waited to be told. Her days were no longer filled with the uncertainty of searching. Now, they were filled with the promise of discovery. She had become not only a listener of the world's song but a weaver, a thread that connected the past, the present, and the future. She was no longer just Anwyn, a wanderer in the forest. She was the keeper who helped to remind the world of its forgotten tunes. It was early morning when she set out again, her feet carrying her along a narrow path that wound through the forest. The air was cool, and the first rays of dawn crept through the trees, casting long shadows that played on the forest floor. The wind was gentle, but it carried the whispers of the earth, the hum of life stirring in the heart of the woods. She had been to many places, but there was always something new to discover, a song to hear, a story to unfold. Today, the village was waiting, as it always was, ready for a new lesson. But there was something more in the air today, a shift in the rhythm of the world that was unlike any she had felt before. As she entered the village, she felt the pull of a familiar energy, the same energy that had called her to the clearing, to the windmill, to the forgotten tree. It was calling her again, urging her towards something yet unseen. The villagers greeted her as they always did, warm smiles, familiar faces, and eyes that held the spark of remembrance. They had changed since her return. They were more connected now, more aware of the song that flowed through the world. But even in their newfound awareness, there was something they had yet to grasp. Something they were still waiting to remember. Anwyn walked through the village square, her gaze sweeping across the familiar faces. But something felt different today. There was a new energy, a new hum that vibrated just beneath the surface, and she knew, deep in her heart, that it was time to take the next step. She walked past the well, past the market stalls, and toward the old oak tree in the center of the square. The tree was ancient, its bark twisted and weathered, its roots deep in the earth. It had been here long before Anwyn had come, and it would likely stand long after she was gone. The villagers had always gathered beneath it for stories, for lessons, for celebrations. Today, however, the tree felt different. There was an energy around it, a shimmer in the air, as though it, too, was ready to remember something long forgotten. As Anwyn stood beneath the tree, the wind stirred. It was gentle at first, but then it picked up, a soft rush that made the leaves above her tremble. The air grew thick, almost electric, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, the voice came again, not spoken, but felt. It was the same voice she had heard when she first entered the forest, when she had crossed the threshold into the unknown. The voice that had guided her on her journey. It is time. The world shifted around her. She closed her eyes, letting the song of the earth fill her once more. The wind was louder now, filling her ears with a melody that was both familiar and strange. It was the song of the world, but it was more than that. It was the song of beginning, of creation, of stories still to be written. When she opened her eyes, the world before her was not the same. The tree was still there, standing tall in the village square, but the air was different. The village itself seemed to shimmer, its edges blurred, as if it were caught between two worlds. And there, just beyond the edge of the square, stood a figure cloaked in light and shadow. Anwyn knew who it was. The figure was a part of her, yet not. It was the version of herself that had never left the forest, that had stayed behind when she had wandered into the stars. It was the part of her that had always been here, in the village, waiting for the song to be heard again. "You've come back," the figure said, her voice both soft and strong. "And now, the path is open." Anwyn stepped forward, her heart swelling with a sense of peace and purpose. She had never truly left. She had always been part of the village, part of the earth, part of the song. The journey she had taken had only been to remind her of what she had always known. The figure stepped aside, revealing a path that had never been there before. It was not a road paved in stone, but a path made of light, glowing softly, winding through the trees, into the unknown. "The song is not just for you," the figure said. "It is for everyone. It is the story that will never end." Anwyn took a deep breath and stepped onto the path. As she did, the world seemed to shift again, as if the very air was parting to make way for her. The village behind her faded into the distance, but it was not gone. It was always there, always part of her. The song began to rise, filling the air with its melody. And as Anwyn walked forward, she knew that this was not the end of her journey. It was only the beginning. The path ahead was open, and it was hers to walk. Epilogue, the song never ends. Anwyn continued to walk along the glowing path, her heart full, her steps light. The song of the stars, the song of the earth, and the song of the world itself filled her with a sense of peace that she had never known before. She was no longer a wanderer. She was the keeper of the song. And as she walked, the world sang with her. For the song never ends. It echoes through time, through memory, through the very fabric of the universe. It is a song of becoming, a song of remembering, and a song of beginning. And as long as the earth turns, and the stars shine, the song will continue. Chapter 14, the unwritten chapter. The world had become still, like a page waiting to be filled with words. The song of the stars, the whispers of the wind, the hum of the earth beneath her feet, they all came together in a single, harmonious note. Anwyn had traveled far, learned much, and shared the song of the universe with those who had forgotten. But she knew in her heart that there was one final story to be told. It was the story she had not yet found. The path ahead stretched out before her, but it did not look like the road she had traveled before. It was not a well-worn trail. It was not a path defined by the familiar. Instead, it was a blank space, an empty canvas that beckoned her to step forward and write her own chapter. As she walked, the air around her grew colder. The wind had died down, leaving only the distant calls of birds and the rustle of the leaves in the trees. The light of the stars dimmed, and Anwyn could feel a pull within her, as if the world itself was drawing her deeper into the unknown. She had seen the edges of this path before, but only now did she realize what it truly meant. It was the unwritten chapter, the space between the stories, the place where new beginnings are born. And now, it was her turn to step into it. The trees around her seemed to part, revealing a hidden glade. It was quiet here, too quiet. The usual hum of life had faded, and there was an eerie calm that hung in the air. The ground beneath her feet was soft and untouched, as though no one had walked here for centuries. In the center of the glade stood a stone archway, taller than any tree in the forest, its surface covered in moss and vines. The archway looked ancient, as though it had been standing for as long as time itself, waiting for someone to come and pass through. Anwyn approached the archway, her heart beating faster with each step. She could feel the energy in the air, the pull of the unknown. It was as though the world was holding its breath, waiting for her to make her choice. She reached out and touched the stone. It was warm to the touch, despite the coolness of the air. The moment her fingers made contact, the world around her seemed to shift. The ground trembled beneath her feet, and the sky above her darkened. The stars were no longer visible. Instead, a swirling mist appeared, filling the space between the trees and the archway. And then, from the mist, a figure emerged. It was not a person, not a spirit, not a creature of the forest. It was something else entirely, something older. Its shape flickered between solid and ethereal, like a shadow caught in the flicker of a flame. The figure's face was obscured, but its presence was undeniable. Anwyn stood still, unsure of whether to approach or step back. But the figure did not move toward her. It simply stood, waiting. The air around her grew heavier, charged with energy. Anwyn could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. This was not just a decision about the path she would take. This was a decision about who she was meant to become. The figure's voice, when it came, was not spoken. It was a presence, a thought that filled her mind and heart. "This is the unwritten chapter," the voice said. "It is the space where all stories are born, where all journeys begin, and where all endings are written." Anwyn took a deep breath. She knew that this was not just the beginning of another journey. This was the beginning of the story she would write for the world. The figure seemed to fade slightly, its shape growing more fluid. "What will you write?" it asked, its voice both soft and commanding. Anwyn closed her eyes and let the question settle within her. She had carried the song of the stars, the memories of the forgotten, and the wisdom of the earth. But now, she was being asked to do something different. She was being asked to create. To write a new chapter, one that had never been written before. "I will write a story of belonging," she said, her voice steady. "A story where everyone remembers their place in the world, where no one is ever lost, and where the song of life continues forever." The figure did not respond immediately. Instead, it seemed to dissolve into the mist, its form swirling and shifting like smoke caught in a breeze. Anwyn felt a rush of energy, of power, filling the space around her. The world seemed to respond to her words, to her choice. The archway before her began to shimmer, its surface rippling like water disturbed by a stone. The vines that had covered it fell away, revealing a doorway. The air around her seemed to hum with the possibilities that lay beyond. Anwyn stepped forward, her feet light on the ground. She had already chosen her path. It wasn't about the road she walked. It was about the story she was about to create. And that story was one of connection, of remembering, and of belonging. She stepped through the archway. And as she did, the mist parted, the stars returned, and the world around her began to take shape once more. Epilogue, the song of the unwritten chapter. Anwyn's journey was not over. It had only just begun. With each step she took, she continued to write the unwritten chapter, creating a new story for the world, one that was full of possibilities. And though the path ahead was still uncertain, she knew that the song would always guide her, that the story she was creating was one that would resonate for generations to come. In the village, in the forest, in the hearts of the people she had touched, the song continued. It was no longer just hers. It was theirs. And together, they would write the next chapter. Because the story was never truly finished. It was always in the process of being written. Chapter 15, The Call of the Infinite Paths. Anwyn stepped forward into the new world that unfolded before her. The mist swirled and parted as she crossed the threshold of the archway. The world around her seemed to vibrate with energy, not in the way the forest had hummed, but with a newness, a world that had never been touched by anyone before. The ground beneath her was soft but firm, as if the earth itself was still finding its form. She could feel it. This was a world unwritten, a canvas still waiting for the first stroke, a melody waiting for the first note. She looked up to see the sky stretching infinitely above her. It wasn't the deep blue of the heavens she had known, but a soft, iridescent hue, like the calm before dawn. Stars shimmered within the sky, but they were not fixed in their places. They danced, shifting and twirling, as though they themselves were seeking something. The air was thick with possibility. The wind did not blow as it had in the forest or the village. It was a current of ideas, a swirl of potential. Each breeze carried with it the whispers of paths not yet walked, roads not yet formed, choices not yet made. Anwyn took a deep breath, letting the air fill her lungs. It was unlike any air she had ever breathed. There was no weight to it, no sense of gravity. Instead, it was light, almost weightless, filled with the promise of discovery. Before her, there was nothing but open space, a vast expanse that stretched infinitely in every direction. The ground was covered in soft grasses, glistening with a silver light, and though there were no trees here, there was a profound sense of life in the air. She felt as if the very earth was waiting for her to give it direction, to shape it. Then, as if summoned by her thoughts, a path began to materialize in front of her. It was not a simple dirt trail or a paved road. It was a path made of light, swirling and shifting, constantly in motion as if it were alive, breathing with every step. As Anwyn stepped forward, the path twisted and turned, expanding and contracting in response to her movement, leading her deeper into the landscape. And just as she thought she could see where it led, the path changed, splitting into several more. Each path was unique, some twisted like spirals, others branched out in complex patterns, and some simply vanished into the mist, leaving only a whisper of their existence. Anwyn stopped, looking at the multitude of paths before her. Which one would she take? Every direction seemed to call to her, each one offering its own set of possibilities, its own adventure. She could feel the weight of the choice pressing upon her. There is no wrong path, a voice said behind her. Anwyn spun around, her hand instinctively reaching for the key in her pocket. The figure that stood behind her was familiar yet different, a reflection of herself, but older, wiser. This version of herself did not appear as a mere shadow or memory but as a guide, one who had already walked these paths and had come to understand them in ways Anwyn had yet to. The figure smiled softly, her eyes full of a depth that seemed to stretch across time. You have come to the infinite paths, she continued, her voice calm, yet powerful. Here, every choice matters. But it is not about the destination. It is about the journey you create along the way. Anwyn felt a rush of understanding, but she did not speak. She simply listened. The path you take will not define you, Anwyn. It will only reveal who you already are. The figure stepped forward, raising her hand. The paths before them began to shift once more, their forms becoming more defined. The silver light that had glistened at the edges of the paths now turned into shimmering threads that seemed to reach out, inviting her to follow. "There is a story waiting for you here," the figure said, her voice almost a whisper. "But it is your story to write. You will choose the roads, the people, and the moments that shape it. No one else can tell it but you." Anwyn nodded, the weight of her choices sinking in. This was no longer a simple quest or a single journey. This was about defining her place in a world that had no end. The infinite paths were not just a destination, they were a world waiting for her to shape, to guide, and to become. The figure smiled one last time, her eyes full of pride and encouragement. "Go," she said softly. "Create your path. Write your story. We are all waiting for you." And with that, the figure faded, dissolving into the light of the paths. But her presence remained, like a warm embrace that lingered long after she was gone. Anwyn stood alone again, the paths before her now fully formed, each one glowing softly in the night. The ground beneath her feet seemed to hum, the air around her brimming with energy. The infinite paths were alive, waiting for her to make her mark. She stepped forward, her foot landing on the first path that lay before her. As soon as she touched the ground, the world around her seemed to shift. The light from the path grew brighter, more vibrant, filling her with warmth and understanding. She could feel the pulse of the earth beneath her feet, the rhythm of the world in her heart. And as she continued forward, she felt the winds of possibility swirl around her. Every path was filled with stories waiting to be discovered, waiting to be written. But no matter which road she chose, no matter which story she told, she knew one thing with certainty. The journey was just beginning. Epilogue, the journey without end. Anwyn walked along the infinite paths, each step bringing her closer to her true self, each choice opening new doors to stories and experiences that had yet to unfold. The light from the paths illuminated the world around her, and with each step, she felt herself growing, learning, and becoming more than she had ever imagined. The paths she chose led her to places both familiar and strange, to people who shared their stories and others who had their own paths to walk. And with every encounter, with every moment, Anwyn found that the world was vast, yet intimate. It was a place full of stories waiting to be discovered, full of lives waiting to be remembered. As she walked, the song of the earth, the wind, and the stars filled her heart, guiding her along the way. The infinite paths were not just roads, they were the journey itself, and in them, Anwyn had found her true place. For the story, like the journey, would never truly end. It was simply waiting to be written. Chapter 16, The Story of Endless Paths. Anwyn stood at the junction of countless paths, each one stretching out into the unknown. The wind hummed around her, a soft song that seemed to echo with the same energy that had filled the world when she first stepped onto the infinite paths. The stars above her twinkled brightly, each one a beacon, guiding her forward. And yet, as she looked at the endless roads that lay before her, a question lingered in her heart. Where would she go next? The path she had chosen to walk was no longer clear. The choices ahead of her were not simple, they were infinite. Every step she took could lead her to new worlds, new experiences, new stories. The power of creation was in her hands, and the weight of it was both exhilarating and daunting. With each path stretching before her, Anwyn felt the pull of something deeper, a need to not just walk these roads but to shape them. She had learned that the infinite paths were not just for exploration, they were themselves part of the story. A story waiting to be told. But how could she tell it? She took a step forward, her foot landing on a path made of glimmering light. It was a narrow, winding trail, winding through the trees. The light was soft and warm, almost like the glow of a firefly, but the path stretched endlessly, disappearing into the horizon. The air around her seemed to pulse, as though the world was listening, waiting for her to choose. She had already chosen once. She had chosen to create, to bring the song to the world, to remind people of their place in the world and help them remember. But now, it was time for the next choice, the one that would not only define her path but define the world she was creating. A faint voice reached her ears. It was not a voice she could hear with her ears, but one that came from within. It was the voice of the wind, the earth, and the stars. It was a voice she knew well. "What will you create now, Anwyn?" it asked. "What will you leave behind, and what will you bring into being?" The wind's question swirled around her, carrying with it echoes of the past, whispers of forgotten paths, and fragments of lives she had touched. She could feel it all around her, the weight of history and the pull of destiny. The voice was asking her not just to choose a path, but to choose the world. "I will create a world of balance," she said softly, her voice steady and filled with conviction. "A world where stories can coexist, where choices are made, and where every path leads to understanding." With these words, the path before her began to shift. The narrow trail of light widened and grew, twisting and turning, branching off into new directions. The trees around her began to change, their leaves glowing with colors she had never seen before, purples, blues, and golds that shimmered in the light of the stars. And then, the wind spoke again, this time with a note of approval. "You have chosen wisely," it said. "The world you create will not be bound by simple rules. It will be a world of choice, a world of stories, and a world of endless possibilities." Anwyn smiled. This was not a choice she had made lightly, but it was the right one. She had chosen to give the world the freedom to create its own path, its own story. And with that choice, she felt the weight of her responsibility settle upon her. The world was hers to shape. The world was theirs to shape. As she walked further down the path of light, she noticed something else. The trees were no longer just trees. The roots beneath the ground stretched far, intertwining with other paths, other lives, other stories. The wind itself seemed to carry the stories of those who had walked these paths before, whispers of their choices, their struggles, their triumphs. Anwyn had not just created a world. She had created a connection. Every path was now a part of the greater whole. Every choice, every person, every story intertwined, connected, and intertwined in the great web of the infinite paths. The path she walked was no longer just a road. It was a living, breathing, evolving part of the world. The trees, the wind, the stars, they were all part of it. As she walked, she knew that she was no longer alone. The world around her had become part of her, and she had become part of it. The paths are endless, the voice said again, this time with a sense of peace. But every path leads somewhere. And every path leads to you. And so Anwyn walked, knowing that the world she had created was not an ending, but an eternal beginning. A world of choices, of connections, and of stories that would continue to unfold, one step at a time. Epilogue: The Infinite Journey. Anwyn continued to walk the paths of the world she had created, but now, she walked not as a wanderer, but as a storyteller. She had given the world a song, a melody that would never end. And as the paths continued to unfold before her, she knew that her journey, and the journey of those who walked the paths she had created, would never truly end. The paths of the infinite world stretched forever, each one waiting to be explored, each one waiting to be written. And in every story, the song would live on. Chapter 17, The Circle of Stories. Anwyn stood at the center of the circle of stories, a place that seemed as old as time itself. The air here hummed with the weight of untold stories, whispers of lives lived, and memories that had faded into the earth. She had found her way to this mysterious circle after countless steps through the infinite paths, drawn by a force she could neither explain nor ignore. The ground beneath her feet was soft, like moss, and it was dotted with stones arranged in a perfect circle. Each stone seemed to pulse with a faint light, as if it contained a story of its own, waiting to be told. Above her, the sky was not the soft blue she had known, but a swirling tapestry of colors: blues, purples, and golds that blended into one another in patterns that seemed to form and reform with each passing moment. The wind no longer carried the same lightness it once did. Now, it seemed to whisper, not to her ears, but directly into her soul. Each gust brought with it a voice, a story fragmented, incomplete, but full of meaning. She had come here, to this circle, because she felt the pull of the stories not yet told. There was a part of her, deep within, that knew the world she had created was not finished. She had given the world a song, but she had not yet finished the melody. The stones around her shifted slightly, their light deepening, and from the shadows at the edge of the circle, a figure emerged. Anwyn's heart skipped a beat. The figure was familiar, but at the same time, it wasn't. It was a version of herself, a reflection, but with subtle differences. Her hair was longer, her eyes darker, and there was a weight in her expression, as though she had seen things Anwyn had not yet understood. The figure stepped forward, her footsteps silent on the moss-covered ground. She raised her hand, and the air around them shimmered. A ripple passed through the circle of stones, and in that moment, Anwyn understood. This place, this circle, was not just a location. It was a gateway. It was the nexus where all stories converged. And standing here, in this moment, she was no longer alone. Every version of herself, every possibility of who she could become, stood before her in the form of countless threads, each one waiting for her to choose. The figure smiled, a soft, knowing expression. "Welcome, Anwyn," she said, her voice both familiar and strange. "I see you have come to claim your story." Anwyn's heart raced. She had always known that there were infinite versions of herself, each one shaped by a different choice, a different path. But now, standing here in the circle of stories, she realized that these versions were not just reflections of what she could have been. They were real. Each version of herself had its own life, its own world, and they were all connected through the choices she made. "What is this place?" Anwyn asked, her voice steady but filled with awe. The figure gestured to the stones around them. "This is the circle of stories. It is the place where all paths converge, where all stories are written and rewritten. Every decision you make creates a new story, a new version of yourself. Each one is as real as the other, and all are connected." Anwyn's mind raced with the possibilities. She had always known that the infinite paths led to new worlds, new stories. But this place, this circle of stories, was something beyond what she had imagined. It wasn't just a place of potential, it was a place of understanding. But why now? Anwyn asked, her eyes searching the figure before her. "Why have I come to this moment?" The figure's smile deepened, but her eyes became more serious. "You have reached the point where your story has split into so many possibilities, so many directions. It is time to decide which version of yourself you will become. Will you continue on the path you've chosen, or will you explore new stories? Will you live the life you've created, or will you create a new one?" Anwyn took a deep breath, her heart thumping in her chest. She understood now. The path she had walked, the song she had given the world was only one story. But it was not the only story. "I don't want to lose what I've already created," she said quietly. "I don't want to leave behind the world I've shaped." The figure nodded, her expression softening. "You don't have to. Every story, every version of yourself, can coexist. You are the thread that binds them all together. The stories are not separate, they are parts of the same whole. You are not choosing one path over another. You are expanding your journey." Anwyn's heart swelled with understanding. She had spent so much time worrying about the right path, the right choice. But now, she saw the truth, there was no single path. There were endless paths, and each one was as valid as the other. She was not confined to one version of herself. She could be all of them. She could live every story. "So, what do I do now?" Anwyn asked, her voice filled with wonder. The figure smiled and stepped back, motioning to the center of the circle. The stones around them began to glow brighter, the air humming with energy. Anwyn could feel the pull of the stories, the lives that had yet to be lived, the choices that had yet to be made. Now, the figure said, you choose. You create. You walk the paths, but you also leave them for others to follow. Anwyn closed her eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle within her. She was ready. Ready to walk the paths not just for herself, but for everyone. She was ready to write her story, and to let others write theirs. As she opened her eyes, the circle of stories shimmered and expanded before her. The paths stretched out infinitely, each one a road to a new world, a new possibility. The wind carried the hum of 1,000 voices, and the stars above twinkled brightly, as if cheering her on. Anwyn took the first step. The path beneath her feet glowed, responding to her movement. The stories of the past, present, and future intertwined, wrapping around her like a cocoon. She was not just Anwyn. She was the storyteller, the creator, the weaver of worlds. And with that step, she entered the infinite paths once more, knowing that every journey, every choice, every story was hers to live, hers to shape. And the world, as it always had been, was waiting. Epilogue: The Endless Journey. Anwyn continued to walk through the circle of stories, her heart filled with the song of creation, the music of the world she had made and the worlds she was yet to discover. She knew now that the path she had taken was only the beginning of a journey that would never truly end. The world was full of infinite possibilities, and Anwyn was ready to walk them all. Every choice, every path, every story she told would be a thread woven into the vast tapestry of the universe. And as she walked, she knew that no matter where her journey took her, she would always be the storyteller, the one who could write the song of the world, over and over again. Chapter 18, The Shifting Realms. Anwyn stood at the edge of the circle of stories, her heart still echoing with the endless possibilities that lay before her. The air around her was thick with the hum of the worlds that stretched into infinity, each one a reflection of the choices made, the paths taken, and the lives lived. But the question still lingered in her mind: what now? The paths were clear, the roads endless, and the world she had shaped was alive with the pulse of stories yet to be told. But in this vastness, Anwyn realized there was a deeper truth she had not yet understood. The world was not just an endless collection of paths, but a shifting landscape, one that constantly evolved, one that was connected in ways she had not yet discovered. She took a step forward, and as she did, the world around her began to shift. The ground trembled beneath her feet, and the sky above rippled like water disturbed by a stone. The paths before her twisted, bending in on themselves, folding into new roads, new possibilities. The stories she had yet to write were no longer just potential. They were alive, constantly changing with every choice, every action. And as the world shifted, she saw it the first sign of what was to come, the shifting realms. The air shimmered, and before her appeared a doorway not made of wood or stone, but of light and shadow. It pulsed with energy, vibrating with the force of 1,000 worlds that existed beyond it. The doorway was not a single point in space, but a living portal, one that moved with the ebb and flow of time itself. Anwyn stepped closer, drawn by the pull of the doorway. As she neared it, She could feel the energy swirling around her, an energy that seemed to carry the weight of an entire universe within it. The path she had walked was only a single thread in the vast fabric of the infinite paths. But this doorway, it was something different. It was a gateway to something greater. A voice, soft, ancient, and familiar, whispered through the air. Do you understand now? Anwyn turned, her heart racing. The figure that appeared before her was not the version of herself she had seen before. This figure was different, though still unmistakably her. The face was the same, but there was something more, an ancient wisdom in her eyes, a weight that only time could bring. This was the Keeper of Realms, the one who had walked these paths before and understood their true nature. You have crossed many thresholds, Anwyn, the Keeper said, her voice calm and knowing. But this is where your journey changes. The realms you've seen are but reflections of a deeper truth. The paths you have walked are real, but they are also connected to other worlds, worlds that have always existed alongside your own. Anwyn's breath caught in her chest. She had always known the infinite paths were vast, but this was something new. The concept of worlds, not just timelines or universes, but parallel realities, realms that coexisted with her own, was a revelation she had not considered. The shifting realms are not separate, the Keeper continued, her eyes gleaming with the light of 1,000 stars. They are threads woven together, each one connected to the others. Every choice you make, every step you take, creates a ripple, a wave that can reach into other realms and change them. These realms are like mirrors, reflecting the decisions of one world onto the others. They shift and evolve, just as you do. Anwyn stood still, absorbing the gravity of the words. The infinite paths were not just roads to be walked. They were gateways to entire universes, each shaped by the choices she and others made. She was not just a creator of worlds, she was a weaver, a force that connected the fabric of existence itself. But what does this mean for me? Anwyn asked, her voice filled with wonder and uncertainty. What am I supposed to do with this knowledge? The Keeper smiled softly. You are not just a wanderer, Anwyn. You are the one who will connect the realms. You will guide them, balance them, and help them evolve. The worlds are shifting, yes. But they are shifting together, and you are the one who must ensure that the balance is maintained. Your journey is not about choosing a single path anymore. It is about understanding that each path you take affects the others. You must walk them all. Anwyn's mind reeled as the full scope of her responsibility began to settle upon her shoulders. The weight was immense, but she did not feel crushed by it. Instead, she felt empowered. She had always known that the choices she made were important, but now she understood that they were part of a larger design, a design that connected everything. The realms, the worlds, the stories, everything was intertwined, and she was the one who held the thread. The doorway before her pulsed with energy, drawing her closer. The Keeper motioned toward it. The shifting realms await you. Step through the doorway, and you will enter the first of many worlds. But remember this, every world you enter, every realm you visit, will reflect a different version of you. The choices you make will shape not just your world, but all the worlds. Walk carefully, Anwyn. The balance must be maintained. Anwyn took a deep breath, her heart filled with a sense of purpose. The path ahead was no longer a single road. It was a network of possibilities, each one leading to different versions of herself, different versions of the world. She was no longer just walking a path. She was creating the path, shaping the story as she went. With a final glance at the keeper, Anwyn stepped toward the doorway. The moment her foot crossed the threshold, she felt the world shift. Time stretched and warped, the air around her crackling with energy. She could feel the weight of the realms surrounding her, could feel the pull of each path, each world. And then, as quickly as it had begun, the sensation stopped. Anwyn opened her eyes. She was no longer standing in the circle of stories. She was standing in a new world. The sky above was different, dark and filled with swirling clouds that crackled with energy. The ground beneath her feet was cracked, the earth scarred and broken, as if it had suffered some great upheaval. The wind howled through the trees, carrying with it a sense of danger. But it was also alive. The air was thick with potential, with the promise of something that had yet to be discovered. The world was waiting for her. Anwyn took a step forward. She was no longer walking a single path. She was walking the infinite paths, and she would continue to walk them, one step at a time, until every world was connected. Epilogue: The Infinite Connections. Anwyn continued her journey through the shifting realms, each world presenting new challenges, new versions of herself, and new opportunities to shape the future. She was the weaver, the one who could connect the infinite threads of existence, and each step she took echoed across the realms, creating ripples that would resonate through time and space. She was no longer just a traveler. She was the creator, the connector, the one who would guide the realms toward balance. And the journey would never end. It would continue, with each step leading to new worlds, new stories, and new possibilities. The infinite paths were hers to walk, and every world she touched would be forever changed. Chapter 19, The Mirror of Choices. Anwyn stood at the threshold of a new world, feeling the weight of the decision that loomed ahead. The air was thick with the hum of 1,000 possibilities, and the world around her pulsed with an energy she had never felt before. The doorway had brought her here, to a place where the realms did not just coexist, they intertwined. Here, the infinite paths were not just roads waiting to be walked. They were choices, each one shaping an entire world, a universe in its own right. She stepped forward, her feet barely touching the ground as the world around her shimmered and shifted. The familiar forest of vibrant trees and gentle breezes faded into the distance, replaced by a mirror, a massive, reflective surface that stretched as far as her eyes could see. The mirror was not a simple glass or stone. It was alive, pulsating with light and shadow, as if it were an entire world in itself. Anwyn took a step closer, her reflection growing clearer in the mirror. But it wasn't just her reflection, it was other versions of herself, too. Some wore different expressions, others had different eyes, different features, and each one of them seemed to exist in a different world. Each version of Anwyn stood at a crossroads, much like her, but each with a different choice. The voice from the wind echoed once more, soft but powerful. The mirror of choices reflects not just who you are, but who you could have been. It shows every path you have yet to take, every version of yourself that exists in parallel worlds. Anwyn's heart pounded in her chest as she stepped closer to the mirror. She had faced many challenges on her journey, but this was different. This wasn't just about her choosing a path. This was about the entire universe of choices, the infinite ways her life could unfold, and the impact those choices would have on the worlds she had created. Do you understand now, Anwyn? The voice whispered, growing softer. Each choice you make creates not just a path, but a new reality. A new version of the world. And every version of yourself lives, breathes, and shapes those worlds. Anwyn's eyes flicked across the mirror, watching the many versions of herself. Some of them seemed to be standing in places she knew, the village she had returned to, the forest she had wandered through, and even the circle of stories. But others were in places she couldn't recognize, worlds that were entirely new, built upon choices she had not yet made. She saw a version of herself standing in a vast city, its towering spires reaching toward the heavens, the streets filled with life, yet a quiet tension hung in the air. Another version was on a lonely mountain peak, staring out over a sea of clouds, lost in contemplation. One version of herself was laughing with others, surrounded by people in a place that felt warm, familiar. And then another, this version was alone, surrounded by books, lost in the silence of endless study. What does this mean? Anwyn asked, her voice trembling. Are all these versions of me real? The voice responded, a soft hum that echoed through the space. They are real in the sense that they exist within their respective worlds. But they are also you, Anwyn. Every version of you is a reflection of a choice you might make, a decision you have yet to confront. The mirror seemed to ripple, the versions of Anwyn shifting and blending together. Some of the images in the mirror grew clearer, while others faded. Anwyn's heart raced as she realized that these weren't just reflections. These were choices, and each choice would pull her into a different version of reality. She reached out, her fingers brushing the surface of the mirror. The moment her hand made contact, she felt the pull like gravity, but different. The mirror was not just showing her versions of herself, it was calling her to make those choices, to step into those worlds. A wave of understanding washed over her. I don't need to choose just one path, she whispered to herself. I can choose them all. I can step into each version of myself. And as soon as she spoke those words, the mirror responded. The versions of Anwyn she saw began to step forward, emerging from the mirror one by one. They were not shadows or echoes. They were real, living manifestations of choices, each one with its own will, its own desires, and its own path to walk. One by one, the versions of Anwyn appeared before her, their eyes full of wisdom, sorrow, joy, and peace. They were her, but also not her. They had chosen different roads, walked different paths, and they all had their own stories to tell. Which one am I? Anwyn asked, overwhelmed. The version standing closest to her, the one with eyes that glimmered like the stars, stepped forward and placed a hand on her shoulder. You are all of us, she said softly. And we are all you. The choice is yours, Anwyn. Which path will you walk? Which story will you choose to tell next? Anwyn felt her heart swell with emotion as the weight of the decision settled upon her. She was not just a traveler. She was not just a creator. She was the storyteller, and every path she took, every choice she made, created a new chapter. The lives she touched, the worlds she shaped, all of it was intertwined. And as she stood there, surrounded by the versions of herself, she understood that no matter which path she took, she would be writing the story. Her choices would reverberate through the realms, creating new worlds, new stories, new possibilities. She could feel the pull of each version, each one representing a choice, a path, a reality. They all wanted her to step into their world, to become a part of their story. But she knew now that she was not bound to just one. She could walk them all. I choose them all, she said softly, her voice firm with conviction. I will walk the infinite paths, not as a single version, but as every version of me. Every choice I make will shape the worlds, and every world will shape me. I will create, and I will learn, from all of them. The mirror rippled, its surface glowing with a light that filled the entire space. The versions of Anwyn smiled, nodding in approval. They were no longer just reflections. They were her, and she was them. The world around her began to shimmer, the paths shifting once more, expanding in every direction. The infinite paths had not just become a network of choices, they had become a circle, an endless journey of creation, discovery, and transformation. Anwyn took the first step, her heart filled with the certainty that no matter which path she chose, she was ready to write the next chapter. Epilogue, the journey of endless possibilities. Anwyn continued to walk the paths, not as a single traveler, but as a creator, one who shaped the worlds with each choice, with each step. She had learned that the journey was not about the end, but about the endless possibilities that awaited her. The paths were infinite, but every step, every choice, was a new story waiting to be written. And as she walked, she knew that the journey would never truly end. Because as long as there were stories to tell, as long as there were paths to walk, she would continue her journey through the infinite realms, forever shaping, forever creating, forever learning. The story was never finished. It was always waiting to be written.